Thank you for being with us, Congressman.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for having me.
So, we first talked to you about this legislation when you introduced it more than 2 years ago. It's changed a bit since then. What does it do exactly?
Well, I introduced it 2 years ago after national security advisors from the prior administration told me that we have a shortage of semiconductor chips in this country, and everybody knows that if they try to buy an automobile. But the problem is also in our most advanced national security weapon systems, we can't build those because we don't have the chips. So it's a vital national security asset. Not much has really changed in the bill since the final passage. It's gone through a lot of politics in 2 years, which is always, in my view, a bad thing. I think the original bill, for the most part, is there in terms of the grant program and the tax incentives to incentivize companies like Samsung to expand in the United States rather than go offshore, and to make these chips in the United States. This will result in trillions of dollars of investment in manufacturing jobs in the U.S., and Texas will be the real big beneficiary of the bill itself. We did add guardrails to the bill to ensure that any company receiving grants or tax incentives cannot expand advanced semiconductor operations in China. This is primarily built to counter China and their expansion, particularly as you look at Taiwan, where about 90% of the advanced semiconductor chips are being manufactured. As we know, after Putin invaded Ukraine, President Xi is now looking at Taiwan, and it would be a nightmare scenario if China took over Taiwan and then owned 90% of the global manufacturing. So what we added were the guardrails, made the tax provisions a little better, but for the most part, it's pretty much the same bill.
We've already seen tech companies expanding here in Texas. How does this legislation affect that process? Who benefits there?
Well, a lot of these tech companies like Samsung, like Micron, like Intel, Texas Instruments, and around the Dallas area, have all been waiting for this legislation to pass. It's been held hostage for 2 years. I'm glad to say it passed yesterday, and they basically told us that if we did not get this done before our recess in August, they would have no alternative but to go offshore. And that would be to the European market or to Asia, where these incentives are being offered to them as well. So this was, if you will, really an emergency form of legislation to get it done now before they went offshore. Secretary of Commerce and I worked very closely on this bill with the administration to get this thing done because there's, quite frankly, too much at stake. This will have a generational impact for my kids and grandkids because no longer are these companies going to go offshore. They're going to stay here in the United States, and it will protect our national security as well.
Critics of the bill say this is a case of taxpayers funding projects that many tech firms have already committed to. What do you say to people who worry this is corporate welfare?
Well, yeah, it's an odd argument made on both the far right and the far left. Tax incentives have been offered to tech companies for quite some time. Rick Perry did this quite a bit to get businesses in Texas. State and local governments do this all the time. Ronald Reagan offered tax incentives. It got Semitech in Austin up and running with Admiral Emmett back in the day. And so it's really nothing new. But what makes it different in today's world is that when you have China investing $1 trillion in a digital economy, Europe taking our bill, offering these incentives, and Asia, if we want to truly be competitive, we got to be on that playing field. And without these incentives, they will go offshore because they have a duty to their shareholders. And that's why this bill is so important to pass.
What are you hearing from the people you represent in Central Texas about this bill?
They're extremely excited. The Austin Chamber, Samsung called me. Their expansion, both in my district and in Williamson County, hugely, vitally important. Micron's, this is $250 billion. Micron's looking at $250 billion in Texas. Texas Instruments, same thing. When you're all said and done, I mean, Texas is going to be the winner here, and the Austin area with what could be up to $1 trillion uh, trillions across the nation, but maybe close to $1 trillion in the state of Texas. This is going to be a big boost for manufacturing. It's going to be a great jobs bill, if you will. And what I like the most from my perch is to protect our national security and our most advanced weapon systems as we're looking at a more hostile world out there.
There was a late push from Republican leaders to stop the bill, and some members who supported the bill for a long time ended up voting no. Did you face any pushback to change your support? Like, what pushed you to vote yes amid the pressure?
Well, I simply told them I can't vote against my own bill. I mean, it's as simple as that. And I'm not going to let politics interfere with a very important national security bill that Secretary Pompeo and I put together. Um, you know, politics is politics, and they took a very good national security bill. Um, the politics have been the problem for 2 years. We authorized this on the National Defense Authorization Bill 2 years ago. And unfortunately, Schumer's comments about reconciliation were not well received. And I get that by my conference in the House, but has absolutely nothing to do with this CHIPS bill. And I'm very pleased we had a lot of Republicans come out and support it despite the pressure, and we got it done.
To summarize, we're seeing the effect of the chip shortage now. How soon will Americans see any benefit from this legislation?
I mean, right. If you go to buy a car, right, you see there aren't as many chips. As I look at some of the weapons we're trying to put into Ukraine, like the Switchblade 600s, we don't have the chips. And that's pretty scary when the United States of America has a shortage of weapon systems because of chips. And so, it takes about a year and a half to build these fabrication plants, which is why it's so vitally important we passed it now and got it done now. What the CEOs of these companies would tell me is if y'all can't get this done by the August break, by the end of the summer, I have a duty to my shareholders, and we're going to have to go offshore to Asia and Europe where they do offer us these incentives because we can't wait any longer. This should have passed a year ago, Josh, but I'm glad it passed yesterday.
Switching gears, you worked across the aisle to pass legislation aimed at closing cold cases. Now that bill is headed to the president's desk. What led you to take on that bill, and what does it do exactly?
Well, I lived in Austin. I've been a prosecutor most of my career, and seeing what happened in Austin with that awful case, the yogurt shop case, those girls who were killed and raped and burned. And, the former district attorney came to me looking at some DNA evidence I had a unique angle with the FBI to test against some other samples. Unfortunately, we didn't make the connection, but we're hoping new technologies will come forward where we can find the killers in that case. But the point is, those families were not able to automatically open their case for review. What this bill does is it gives the victims a right after 3 years of being a cold case to reopen the case for another investigation and a review of the case for their loved ones. And that's something that the victims in the yogurt shop case didn't have for quite some time until recently.
We're hearing more talk about a potential deal to release Brittany Griner and Paul Whelan from Russia. You're a senior member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. The House members, are they involved in this process? And if so, how?
Well, right. I'm the top Republican on the Foreign Affairs Committee. It's the State Department who's negotiating this. We got Trevor Reed home. He was apprehended in Russia and put in jail, almost died in prison. Paul Whelan, and we got the NBA basketball star. Most of the time, these involve a prisoner swap, and you can argue the merits of that. But I know the families of these two individuals who have been held in a Russian jail for quite some time are very happy to see them to be able to come home. I can't think of anything worse than being stuck in a gulag or a Russian prison, especially Paul Whelan, who's been in there for quite a while. And it's going to be a joyous reunion when they return.
There are frustrations from some who believe more needs to be done to free these two Americans. Are we doing enough? What should people know about the process?
Well, it's hard because we don't have control over Moscow. We have to deal. It's a foreign nation. You're dealing with Putin, who's not a very rational man, especially these days after Ukraine. So you're really kind of at the mercy a little bit. But we have a very good hostage negotiation team at the State Department who've been able to bring prisoners home. We have Americans in jail in Iran, and in China and in Russia. And we need to do everything we can to bring them home. I think, the bottom line is you have in any negotiation, it's a give and take, and they have to get something in return. And the question is, if you do a prisoner swap, you have to look at the equities of who you're swapping for. And is it worth releasing a Russian prisoner here, get them back to Russia in exchange for these two that I believe will be coming home?
Congressman, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it.